How many times have you looked at your notes when you were studying for an exam and couldn't figure out what your notes were saying? In this video, I'm going to show you how to take notes effectively. If you use these tips in your own study routine, you'll never have the problem of not understanding your notes again. This video is kindly sponsored by Lingoda, a platform where you can take lessons to learn a new language, and this note-taking method will be perfect for their language lessons challenge, but I'm going to talk more about that at the end of this video. So in this video, I'm going to address a few things and give some advices that might help you to take your notes more effectively. I am going to talk about what to write down, how to organize your notes, and how to make sure your notes look neat. So without further ado, let's get started. So first things first, structuring your notes. I think structuring your notes is very important to understand what you are writing down later on. Personally, I find it easiest to use the content table in your textbook as some sort of a guide to create a structure in your notes that you can easily follow. And when you are studying your notes later on, it will be easier to refer back to your textbook if necessary. So when I'm writing my notes, I kind of copy-paste the content table in my textbook and I follow that structure for my own notes. And then I write notes for each chapter and each paragraph. The structure of the content table in your textbook is usually very well thought out, so it's really easy to just take that as kind of a guideline for your own study material. I also write down the lecture number at the top of the page and the subject of that particular lecture, so it's easier to organize my notes later on. For creating an overview and structuring your notes, I would also recommend to use symbols. Your notes will be a lot easier to understand if you use symbols like arrows in your notes. It is a lot easier for you to read than having one chunk of text without any space or symbols that kind of order the material. So a second advice I want to give you is to not just write down keywords, write down whole sentences. I know a lot of people who write in keywords, which is a quick way to write down things during the lecture, but it is a lot harder to follow when you're studying for the exam a few weeks later. It is a lot harder to follow your train of thoughts. So that is why I recommend writing in whole sentences as much as you can. Not only will it be easier to understand later on, but it's also a lot quicker to read in my opinion, because your brain doesn't have to fill in these gaps that you leave out when you're taking the notes. Additionally, make sure that your notes are not an exact copy of the PowerPoint presentation. It's supposed to be an addition to the material in your books and the PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint usually contains an overview of the most important things, and only writing down the things that are in the PowerPoint without adding any additional information is kind of pointless if the PowerPoint is going to be available online later on. So make sure you add more things in your notes than just what is in the PowerPoint. So now I'm going to talk about what you should write down. You should write down everything that is important. If you have done proper preparation of the class, you will probably have a good idea on what is important and what is going to be discussed. So here are a few indications of things that are important to take notes of. 1. If the professor repeats a certain thing a few times, or if they are emphasizing it, or if they literally say that that piece of information is important, you should write it down. 2. Sometimes there are things that are relatively new, so the book doesn't mention it. So for example, as a law student, our law books are never entirely up to date because there's always new law coming up and new cases. They are created as we speak. So if there is a new important case, it is important for me to take notes of that case because it won't be covered in the book. 3, if there is anything that is not in the book but the professor really talks about it as some sort of extra study material, you should take notes, because you won't be able to find it in the book later on. Something I wouldn't really take notes of are examples that are really elaborate. So a few sentences is usually enough for you to understand what the professor is discussing for example, 10 minutes long. So if the professor is discussing an example and he's really taking 10 or 20 minutes to explain that example, usually 1 or 2 sentences in your notes will suffice. You won't need the whole story for that. Another advice I want to give you is to use a separate highlighter for anything that is exam related. I, for example, use a bright yellow highlighter to make sure that anything my professor tells us about the exam really jumps out. So I highlight example exam questions, tips for the exam, tips for studying for the exam, and every time the professor says something is really important for the exam, I give it a highlight. And when I'm studying, these notes really jump out of the rest of the text, so I never forget to pay extra attention to those notes, so I can highly recommend that. Now, I know a lot of you guys clicked on this video for taking aesthetic notes, so I'm also going to give some easy tips for making pretty notes. I personally don't think having pretty notes will be very helpful for studying, but it can make studying a lot more fun and it's nicer to look at, especially for the visual learners out there. So here are a few quick tips. 1, I always try to stick to using one color, so if I choose pink, I will use highlighters and pens in different shades of pink. If my notes are all in one color, it is aesthetically more pleasing to my eye than using different colors, so my notes look a lot more coordinated and well put together. So except for the bright yellow color, I try to only use different shades of the same color. So second tip is that I add a sticky note in the same color as my note colors to write down a study material that goes with the notes. So if I'm using a purple theme for the notes of a certain lecture, I will add a sticky note with the mandatory reading material for that lecture. And when I'm studying for my exam, it will be easier to find the relevant study material in my books that goes with those notes. Tip number 3, I always write down the subject at the top of the page. And if you do this in your nicest handwriting or create a pretty header, it doesn't really matter what the rest of your notes look like because your eyes are kind of drawn to the header. And that will compensate quickly written notes. So you don't have to spend a long time on creating pretty notes. If your header is pretty, the rest of your notes will look pretty as well. These note-taking tips will also be super useful for the language lessons on Lingoda. Lingoda is a website where you can learn how to speak a language confidently and get a 100% cashback. So here's how that works. This summer, Lingoda is organizing a language sprint, which is a challenge where you'll learn how to speak a new language with confidence. This challenge starts on July 1st, 2020, and if you attend 30 classes a month for 3 months, you get a 100% cashback. And if you attend 15 classes a month for 3 months, you get a 50% cashback. I've taken some French lessons myself, and I absolutely loved how fast you get to learn a new language in the comfortable environment of your own home. So if this seems like fun to you and you'd like to learn a new language this summer, you have to sign up before June 15th using the link in my description box and deposit 49 euros to secure your spot. With my code CLASS49, you also get a 10 euros discount on the deposit. Your tuition fee and deposit will be refunded fully if you complete the challenge. The places in the sprint are limited, so make sure to sign up fast. I hope you enjoyed this video about my tips and advices for taking notes efficiently. If you like this video, you can let me know by giving it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more student-related videos, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any of my future videos. I will see you in my next video. Bye!